Okay, this is a part 2 on my garage door restoration. So I have this style of a double bay garage door, and the house is built in 1984. It's about 35, almost 40, no, 35, yeah, 36 years old. Okay, so what happened was the bottom panel rotted out after I had been living here for a couple of years. And I didn't really know what to do with it. It eventually got to the point where, these started separating, and it seemed as though it was beyond my capability to repair it. I was able to find a source that made these panels. Somehow at my hardware store they had a flyer or something. I can't even remember. This was going back 15 years or so, before the internet made all of this more available. So I did put in an order for 2 new doors. They came out, as you can see, really perfect in terms of matching. I was very happy with them. They honestly were not that expensive. Now, also, you can see that the panels are actual wood. It's not just the hardboard, okay? Now, what I did was I primed them before I put them on all around. I tried filling in all of these little, the panel gaps with the primer. Then I installed them. My intention was, to give them a finished coat of paint, but I never got around to it. And that could have been 15 years ago. Now, I'm getting back to it. They've held up pretty well. I don't see any real rot. And what I'm trying to do is rot proof, or extend the life of these, as well as just painting them. So they look okay. Now, while I was at it, I have been taking a look at some of the other elements of this garage door area. In particular, the where it meets the ground. So in a previous video, I filled this gap in with this rubberized caulk. That was now about 3 or 4 days ago, and the caulk seems to have been, firmed up. It actually looks like it's flowing, but it's all hardened up now, and so far so good on that. But the other thing is the trim boards, or whatever you want to call them. This board, and this board, on all 4 sides, I have replaced those. They're no longer the original. The originals had rotted, and it's no surprise, you would think, because they essentially go down and touch either the driveway or the concrete apron of the garage, so they're going to get a lot of wetness. And I did notice when I was looking here, I still have the boards that I took off, which were in this position. I don't know which the name for that particular trim piece is. They actually came off pretty easily. In fact, it looks like they were actually screwed on rather than nailed for some reason. And I noticed now that these were actually made of cedar, and they were not really rotted. I say not really, but let's take a look at what would have been the bottoms of them. There's one of them, not bad. Here's one, and you can see what was the bottom of that one. Was not terrible, okay? It was actually starting to rot. I believe the other trim pieces were not cedar, and I believe that they were rotted much worse. I can't, my memory won't serve me, but in any case, what I did was, at that time, I started replacing pine trim boards with cedar trim boards, just based on the idea that if you're going to have cedar clavards, why would you put on a pine trim board? When I started noticing that the pine trim boards were rotting all over the place. Now here's an example of a trim board. Very long one, in fact. That was pine. It originally was in two pieces because of the length, and it was rotted. And as you know, when you have a cut, a horizontal cut on a trim board, that's a spot where you get end grain. I replaced it with a single piece of cedar. It's this type of stock, extremely high quality in the sense that there's no knots. It's all surfaced on four sides and what have you. It's extremely expensive, but I thought it was worth it because I didn't want to have to be replacing these pine trim boards. Now, when it came time to replace these guys, I began looking into less expensive alternatives, and I found this particular brand. This is a board that is sold at Lowe's. It is a cedar trim board, but it's not surfaced on all four sides. Let me give you an example. Okay, this is an unused piece. It's surfaced, I guess, on three sides, and one side is rough. This one's got a crack in it. Now, you know cedar does have a tendency to split. So that you have to be careful, but in many applications on a trim board, it's not structural. Even if it's split, it's actually fine. You can still nail it in place. You can paint it. You can seal that thing, and I think it would be fine. Of course, this particular one, it does go all the way through. Some of them don't go all the way through. Okay, this is the rough side, and you can do that two ways. You can put the rough side in or out depending on the appearance that you're looking for. I noticed here that I didn't necessarily pay strict attention. Generally, I might have put the smooth side out, but I noticed on some of the boards the rough side is actually out. So it might have been based on the knots. I might have done it based on knots. I don't think that's a tremendously big deal, but I tend now to always want to have the smooth side out, even if there's knots on it, because I'm going to paint it. Okay, now that's just an example of the trim board, but now I want to show you what I did now when I'm trying to do a second pass on this garage door. When I replaced these pieces, I laid the wood all the way down to the ground, which is the cement, or to the driveway. This driveway has since been replaced. Because I think that's the way the originals were, and honestly I didn't know what else to do. Now, I'm taking a second pass. These cedar boards have held up fine over 15 years, but when I noticed, and I looked at the bottom of them, the bottom pieces, I mean the trim, the cedar is rot resistant, but it's not 100% rot proof. And in this case now, I've decided to take a different approach. I've taken about a ½ inch and I've undercut off of this. I don't want contact with the ground. I'm going to fill this, but I'm not going to fill it right now, but I'm going to either caulk it or to find some way of putting some material under there. I'm not sure exactly what, but the idea is I don't want contact with the, if at all possible, I want to avoid any contact with the ground or the cement floor. Now, here's an example where here's a structural member of the garage door behind the trim. I actually undercut that because what I discovered was that's not it's not load bearing. It's actually the support for that is actually hanging from above. It doesn't need to sit on the floor, so I actually undercut it. Okay. Now, in the middle case, it's actually a little bit different because this section is different. There's actually a small wall between behind it and between it. And if I look in here, you'll see there is a bottom plate of a small wall. The wall's only about 2 feet wide. And that way, that does sit on the concrete floor. Now it's all wet right now, and the reason is because I've treated it. I've treated it with this material that I have been using, boracare. The idea is I want to treat it from dry rot and or termites. This is load bearing. I could not, for example, I tried seeing if I could slide a metal plate underneath that bottom plate to make a barrier, in that case for termites, but I couldn't because it's load bearing. It's flush down again, and I do not want to reconstruct this entire wall. There is, you can see, damage at various places. I just saturated it yesterday with a 1-to-1 solution of the boracare, and that it does turn everything darker than it was, but in any case, my intention is to try to preserve this. I have undercut those pieces of the wood, like this one, which are not structural and are load bearing, okay? The ones that are load bearing, I couldn't do that. So I'm going to, you get the idea here. I'm trying to separate the wood from the ground and